4 shootings involving officers within the past 5 days. The sudden surge in deadly force incidents has San Antonio police actively investigating. Eyewitness News reporter Zach Briggs reveals the latest data on these shootings and what one political scientist believes could be behind these confrontations.
2 officer-involved shootings unfolding yesterday, one of them happening on the city's west side. A Via Transit police officer shot and killed a gun-wielding man aboard a bus. What triggered the officer to engage remains unclear. But what is clear is that each of the latest officer-involved shootings included suspects who had possession of firearms. According to SAPD, there have been 7 officer-involved shootings this year. At the same time, in 2020, there were 8 investigations. UTSA political science professor Javier Oliva pointed out the trend of San Antonio officer-involved shootings within recent years.
They have the statistics from 16 to 20. There's been 14, 15, 16, 20, and 19 incidences over the last 5 years.
Oliva, without referencing a specific incident, says the coronavirus pandemic may have a certain effect on those who end up confronting police.
Anytime that you have situations with depression, unemployment, difficulties and stability of one's life, people have to find ways to resolve these challenges in our lives. These are resolving crisis.
The Texas Senate will soon be voting on a bill that strips the permit requirement to carry handguns. If passed, Oliva foresees potentially even more officer-involved shootings taking place.
The movement toward allowing more and more people to possess firearms in conflict with the right to bear arms and what we see in our Constitution and what our legislature is trying to do will probably increase these types of confrontations because guns will be readily available.
Meanwhile, the officers involved in the latest shootings are on leave while investigations continue. Zach Briggs, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.